I've been so pleased with how well it's been doing. These plants were just put in back in December, somewhere around that time, or January, I think it was, and they've just done wonderful this year. I'm actually experimenting with a different fertilizer for these riparian plants, and so most of the riparian plants have roots growing down into the substrate, and so I decided to use some API aquatic plant food, which is designed for pond plants, and it's the same idea. It's an aquarium tab. You just push it down into the sand, deep into the substrate, and I think it's working pretty well. I mean, it's been a few weeks and I've noticed a lot of growth in the Monstera adansonii and a lot of new growth on the golden goddess philodendron and the pothos that are here, of course. So anyways, it's working out pretty well, and I've been testing the water, and nitrates, nitrites, and all that are not an issue. So it's staying down in the substrate, so that's a good sign. So I've got some jade pothos growing here, Monstera adansonii. Got global green pothos, which is variegated, just two different shades of green as variegation. Marble queen pothos, and it's starting to grow up here. Baltic blue pothos. It's got a leaf development that's similar to Monstera, and look at some new leaves over here, some larger leaves since it has been fertilized, and yeah, it has the lobes developing very similar to Monstera, so that's pretty cool. The golden goddess philodendron, it's getting pretty tall. It's actually growing up behind the light slightly, but the leaves keep reaching downward and going for the light, which makes sense. So I may need to reconfigure some lighting here shortly, raise this up, but I still need a good bit of light down here. And then we've got the red Chinese evergreen. It's been putting on a lot of new growth lately. These are grown from cuttings that I took about, 2 years ago, and they've moved from this tank out to the greenhouse, back into this tank. It's been around, but yeah, these are about 2 years old. So that, I mean, they're pretty slow growing, and of course the red Chinese evergreen is not a large plant anyway. It stays pretty small, stays pretty short. So these, the new leaves come out and they're pretty small, but eventually they'll get to be, this size, like the ones down here. But yeah, it's been doing great. Now these waffle plants are kind of in a duel here. I've got the purple waffle plant in the back, and it's growing up, and pretty soon it's going to be overshadowing this tricolor. So I'm going to have to prune these back, I think, at some point. But these make such a great riparian plant. They're easy to grow, easy to propagate. Probably the most ideal beginner plant beyond pothos, which is the most popular, but I think purple waffle plant is probably next in line for easiest plant to grow. Down here I've got a cutting of the ribbon bush, and I think I showed you the ribbon bush earlier out in the greenhouse. And I've got a cutting of some syngonium down here, trying to get going. But the the neon pothos is starting over in this corner. It's growing up and over. I got it going over the top of the light. It's coming back down in the back. I need to train that a little bit more. I've got the variegated lucky bamboo. I've got the parlor palms, which I just stuck down in here. These were just meant to be temporary. Actually, when I put these down here back in January, I thought, I just need something to fill this area for now until I figure out what to do. Well, they've stayed there all year, and now I kind of like them there. They've continued putting on new growth, and they do a great job of just filling in the area. Otherwise, it would just be open. Got some more marble queen pothos on this side. Actually got an iris growing here. This is the Regina iris, and I've got one more growing in potting soil outside, and it's of course a lot bigger than this, but I got this plug at the same time as the other one, and I'm testing them out to see how they do in water, of course, compared to growing terrestrially in a pot. Got some more Monstera adansonii over here. and of course I showed you the Baltic blue pothos. But here's some golden pothos that's actually growing over on that side with the jade, and it's come up, and I've got it trained on some bamboo in the back, and it's coming over and now coming down here. You can see how much bigger the leaves and stem has gotten since it's been fertilized. So it's really amazing to see the difference between the growth before and after you fertilize. It's really incredible. And most of these house plants growing in this tank are supported on the rim of the tank by apothecary planters, which are planters designed to attach houseplants to the rim of the tank and allow them to grow, and they blend in very well. I mean, they're very low profile, especially now with these plants having grown so much, and we can still see a few. There's the one that's holding up the philodendron, and this Chinese evergreen's growing in one of the net pot planters. And there's a few other planters as well, different models, holding up some of these other plants. These have actually been very great little planters, and of course I made some videos about these planters. Be sure to check those out. Now this light I added recently, it's a light that I've had this light for about a year. I just haven't really been using it much, and it's a grow light, and it's not really bright, but for like a lower canopy, additional supplement light for this setup, it works really well. I mean, it's giving more light to the Chinese evergreen, the hemagraphis, some of these other plants, but it's very low profile. It's got these flexible necks on it, and you can stretch it out. So, and each lamp on each side is probably about 10 inches or so. And I really wish I had one with longer lamps on each side, because it would be ideal for this to be mounted in the center of the tank and then stretch across all the way on both sides. That way you're getting consistent, full, lower canopy lighting going on. So there's always new things to play with as far as lighting is concerned on these setups. So it's always fun. Now, speaking of lighting, I did something a little bit different. I still have a shop light up here, but I built a box around it. Now these are just cedar like fence boards, which I got from Lowe's, and they were about $4 each. I think this is just about, this is 2 boards right here, and just a simple box. And on the top, of course, it's open at the top so it can get good ventilation, but I've mounted these 2 pieces of wood here with the hooks so that it can be suspended from above. But it's just a Sunco shop light in here, and I got it off of Amazon. I think it's 25 bucks. Actually got 2 of them. They were 25 each, but they came as a 2-pack. I've got the other down there above the 10-gallon tank. It's got good ventilation, so there's no heat buildup at all. And of course, these LED lights don't build up heat much anyway. But leaving it open at the top, it's almost like a valance light in that it's got some light coming up. Most of it's down below, but so any plants that are like the pothos that are growing up here, they're going to be able to get some light from the top coming off. But like I said, I mean, at some point I'm going to need to raise this up, I think, another level, and then that's why I think it would be very great to have the flexible light in the center, giving lower canopy illumination. The Amazon swords are really taking off again. They were kind of, stagnant for a while. They just needed to be fertilized. So after putting some root tabs in, they're just taking off again, and now they're just about the height of the tank. And over on this side, I've got some more water wisteria that I've got planted. And I don't know, in the past I've had these black skirt tetras that tore up the water wisteria, and I kind of got away from it. But now I'm trying it again. I'm sure they'll tear it up again, but whatever. It's worth trying out. I've got so much water wisteria that I need to do something with it anyway. So the vallisneria that I had growing in here melted back after a dose of peroxide. I dosed peroxide to try to control some of the blackbeard algae that's been building up, and it helped it helped to knock back the algae, but it also melted the vallisneria. And so I just decided, well, I'll take them out, put them in another tank, and they're recovering fine out in the greenhouse. So instead, that's why I wanted to try the water wisteria again. And I've got another Amazon sword down here, a smaller one that is eventually going to get big and kind of shade out that wisteria. So that's, the wisteria is just a short-term plan. Eventually I would like just to have all Amazon swords in this tank, because this is a big enough tank that it can handle the size of these plants. Plus, I just love the effect that these plants give. They're just beautiful. They provide good hiding places for fish and surface area and all that for algae eaters, snails, and everything. And I thinned out the frog bit a pretty good amount. Took most of it out. It's starting to recover, but I thought I'd also try some other floating plants. I've got the Brazilian pennywort growing as a floater, and it's starting to cover the surface really well. Of course, I've got duckweed in there and some more frog bit still, but I've also got this water sprite growing, and it did not originally start in this tank. It started in a smaller tank, but it was getting too large for the 20-gallon it was in, so I decided to move it back here, and this has got more space to grow, and it's going to help provide shade for plants below. So working out pretty well so far. So moving on down to the 10-gallon cat safe riparium. It's coming along very nicely, I must admit. Been really pleased with how well it's turned out. Spider plant's doing amazing. Got Hemographis growing back here, and I've actually trimmed this a few times. And actually some of the cuttings I put in this tank, which are growing in the back, and some other cuttings I put down here below the main plant, and I spread the cuttings to other tanks as well. So it's been just a very easy to propagate plant, like I said earlier, and definitely recommend it for a beginner. And Phytonia is looking really good. I really like having the white Phytonia next to the pink. It really makes a good contrast. And got some polka dot plant in the back, and it's actually starting to flower. Got the purple flowers coming out on it, and there's some sort of nutrient deficiency going on here with the leaves, and so I've got to figure that out. But it's sending out a lot of nice, good new roots. So I think once it gets to the bottom into that substrate, it's going to be fine. And I've got frog bit still doing really well, some duckweed. I just thin it out once a month or so. Betta and the guppies are still getting along. Now these guppies, I'm surprised really that they've survived. I wasn't totally expecting that, but at first the Betta was chasing him all around for the first several weeks, but now he's kind of gotten used to him, and they seem to have developed a truce of sorts, and that's fine. He's a lot more active. I think he's happier to have company in here, even though he's somewhat aggressive, but he's calming down a little bit, getting used to him. Added some dwarf Sagittaria down here. I took out most of the Java moss just because the ongoing problem I have with Java moss is it gets infested with algae, and it's hard to separate it. So in some tanks it does really well without getting infested, but in others it just gets covered with green hair algae, and so decided to take it out since I'm dealing with it in this tank. And of course I added these dwarf magnolia leaves not too long ago, and they're a really good size for this tank. Well, now let's go into the living room and talk about these two tanks. Well, we're going to start over here because it's been a while since I've shown this tank. This was a Lucky Bamboo cherry barb tank that I built over a year ago, made a video on it, and since then I've taken the cherry barbs out, and I decided to move the white clouds that were out in the greenhouse, move them into this tank, and that way I could more closely monitor what's going on with them, because something that happened during the summer, I had the white clouds out in the greenhouse in a tub, and their numbers were growing and they were doing great, and then one day I was out there feeding, and I noticed there weren't nearly as many fish coming to the top, and so upon closer inspection I started seeing a few dead fish, but most were just not even there. They, I guess, had been there so long they decomposed or whatever. So I decided to take out the remaining part of the group and move them in here so I could keep a closer eye on them. What I think happened, we had ridiculously hot summer temperatures. I mean, we're talking 100 degrees plus for most of August. And you know, there's so many things out in the greenhouse that were under stress from the heat, the plants of course, but I really think these fish, the water temperature just got too hot for them. There could have been other things going on, but I believe that's a big part of it. So the aquarium plants I have in here are really just taking off. They're doing fabulous. And I recently fertilized them a few weeks ago, and I'm actually trying out Aquarium Co-op fertilizer tabs, and all they are is just like our homemade tabs, the gel cap, but inside is more of a powder form of the fertilizer. And the reason I was interested in trying these out was because some of the ingredients are mineralized topsoil and red clay, in addition to the nutrients in there for the plants. And so I was curious about using the topsoil and the red clay, because that's something that I'm adding anyway to most of my tanks. The NPK is better than API's aquarium tabs. So we got 2.49 for nitrogen, 1.59 for phosphorus, 9.98 for potassium. And I think that's a really good blend for plants. That's going to help with the leaf growth, you know, and root development primarily. And you know, the ones that do flower, phosphorus is going to help that. But anyway, so I added the root tabs a few weeks ago. The plants are really responding very well, and we'll see what the longevity is. I recommend to add new fertilizer tabs once a month or so, and I don't know if that's going to be necessary, but we'll see. And most of these plants don't need a whole lot of nutrients. They're pretty low, easy beginner, you know, low light plants and all that. So the crypts are in there, cryptocorn, and the dwarf sagittaria. It's starting to spread out. We're starting to get new ones coming up here. So that's a good sign. They're really starting to spread throughout the substrate. I've got some cutting of bacopa that I added about the time that I fertilized. It's probably gotten twice as tall now. But the Java moss is doing well. All the lucky bamboo in the very back, you can see, has sprouted at the base, and it's putting on a whole new stalk underwater. So we'll see how that goes. I haven't had that happen before, but I ended up, it happened shortly after I trimmed all the lucky bamboo in the back, because it had gotten up to where the glass shelf used to be. The glass shelf was about right here. And so I trimmed it back, and then recently I've set up this new aquarium light, and I'm trying it out, and I've got a video, product review video on it. It should be coming out sometime in early November. But the bamboo, I cut it back, and some of it started growing some new sprouts since then, but all of it just about has sprouted new growth from the bottom underwater. So we'll see how it goes. But I've got some narrow leaf pogostemon in the back, and it's really grown about twice as tall as it was when I first planted it. And we've got rotala in there, and of course a lot of ram's horn snails and floating plants or duckweed, frog bit, got some Brazilian pennywort. And all of these I've been thinning out, especially the duckweed, but even the pennywort. I've been cutting out the old parts of it and letting the new parts continue growing. And so that's a good way to help remove all these excess nutrients. And I've got a few cuttings of a couple different things back here. I've got some ajuga right here, which has really darkened a lot with this new light. And that's ajuga's natural color anyway. It's a terrestrial ground cover plant used a lot in landscaping, and it loves moisture. So that's why I was trying it out in this tank. And of course I've got some growing in the greenhouse as well. But this other cutting is Swedish ivy, and since adding the light, it has really just bleached out, and it's not responding well. I think this light is just too bright. And this is a pretty powerful light, and that's part of why I'm testing it out, is because I want to see if it's too much for a tank like this. You know, this is kind of a more of a high-tech setup tank light, and it puts out like 7,000 lumens or something. And of course, the good thing about it is you can dial it down, and I've got it dialed down about halfway, so it's not nearly as bright as it would be on, you know, level 10. So, but anyway, the plants are responding well, and I've had some, you know, some increase in algae here and there, but you know, nothing that hasn't been easy to get out, and it hasn't been invasive or anything. But I've actually got one little platy still in here. The platies that I had in here after the cherry barbs, they ended up having some babies, and I think 1 or 2, maybe 3 of the platy fry have survived. Now, since I moved them out to the greenhouse, they've probably got a dozen or more fry. But this is another Plenum tank that I have set up. It's got an undergravel filter plate that, you know, set up as a plenum, and I've just got one air stone there in the back. Check out the build video of this tank to see how I set up the plenum. But since then, it's been over a year now since it's been set up, and I did have some issues with like green spot algae, really bad in the early stages, but it eventually played out. And once this thing got established, once this thing got balanced, I mean, the water got crystal clear, and it was it's really been just so easy, very low maintenance since then. And of course, I've been adding some leaves to it, mostly for the snails to feed on. Added some magnolia leaves here and there. But I've also got an aloe vera growing out of the top. This has been in here for a few months, and it's got a little root that's going down. And of course, it's very slow growing, but it has grown. It's put on 2 new leaves, and so I'm interested to see how it's going to do going forward, how long it's going to live in this setup, because it is a succulent, and you wouldn't think that a succulent could grow hydroponically, but so far so good. Now I've got this ribbon bush that I've just recently moved inside. It's starting to drop a few leaves, but I want to take some more cuttings off of this and get it going in some tanks. But the 29 gallon, you know, I recently heavily pruned all the pothos again for the second time, and I went ahead and fertilized. And for this, I'm using Aquatic Plant Food by API, and it's actually made for ponds, you know, primarily for water lilies, and it's got a pretty high NPK ratio. It's 10, 12, 8. So that's 10 nitrogen, 12 phosphorus, and 8 potassium. And of course, the higher phosphorus level tells you that it's intended for blooming plants, flowering plants. So none of these are flowering, but the phosphorus can still be helpful for, you know, root development, strengthening of the plant, as well as potassium for that reason. But I put about 4 of these tabs kind of all throughout the tank, and I just did that recently, so I haven't seen the results yet, but I'm interested to see how it's going to go. And I have been testing the water, and you know, everything's staying in the substrate. There's no leaching into the water column, so there's no high nitrate levels or anything like that, or ammonia or nitrite. So these Golden Goddess philodendron, I've been kind of training to grow along the tree branch in the back. And last time I made a video, this philodendron was probably half this height. Now it's doubled in size, and the other one has about doubled in size as well. But I've been training it along the tree branch, and I've got it secured with some Velcro at a few different places. But you know, we got money tree growing here. We got pothos, of course. This is golden pothos, and we got some hemographis that I've trimmed back a few times. This got as high as, you know, the parlor palm at one point. I had to cut it way back. So the roots of these plants are, of course, growing all down through the water, but they are filling up the substrate big time. I mean, those roots are so thick, and I realized it when I put in the fertilizer tabs and pushed them down. It was difficult to even get them down, and it's just amazing how thick they are. And you can see some of these cories, when they start digging in the sand, they're really having to push hard to get even just a little distance down in the sand. That's been really crazy to watch. I think this tank has been the best results that I've gotten out of root growth in the substrate from riparian plants. And so you can imagine the water that's being pulled down through the substrate into the plenum. That water's passing over all of those roots. Of course, the fish are doing really well. Still got my neons, my core group of neons going strong. They're 2 years old now. And the guppies have bred a few times. You can see a few fry swimming around. Now the water has gotten a bit cloudy, and that's because of all the debris from the broken down leaves. All this mulm has been mixed in the sand to a degree. You can see it mixed in the sand pretty well, and the cories, of course, primarily responsible for that. But it has gotten to a point where the buildup is so much that they're constantly kicking it up into the water, and so it may be time to put in either a hang-on-the-back filter or some sort of filter that just is mechanically filtering that mulm, that debris, out of the water. So I'm not sure when I'm going to do that, but that's something I may try to do soon. And here's the 10-gallon that's still in my son's room. I want to take it out at some point. Don't know when that's going to happen, but the peace lily is just continuing to do very well, continuing to bloom, and it's just growing in the substrate in the bottom. Now the substrate is very tall. It's about a third of the way up the tank, maybe a little more in the back, so it gives a little extra height. But the peace lily's doing fine, growing up from the bottom, and leaves being out of the water, it's doing fine. I removed the parlor palms that were all in the back. They were just getting so tall and shading everything out, so I took them out, transferred them out to the greenhouse, divided them up into a few tanks, and put some more cuttings of the Hemagraphis. And I've got this mangrove growing. This is one of the red mangrove propagules that I got a while back, and anyway, it wilted after I brought it in. I think it had to get acclimated to low humidity here in the house, but it's starting to recover now. I really want, I think, to redo this tank, and I'm thinking actually of making it a red mangrove tank, taking the peace lily out and just having red mangroves growing out of the top, and just leaving the bottom kind of sparse like this. I do have some guppies in here that they've been multiplying, and I've removed a good many of them. They continue to multiply. So this is another tank that's on my list to redo at some point. Just got to get around to doing it and have a place to set this up. But it's been great just to watch this peace lily grow and bloom and do really well in this tank. Now, one trick, if the peace lilies, when they bloom, they can drop pollen all over the place. It makes a mess, gets on the leaves, gets in the water, everything. So what I did was I just removed the part that was holding all the pollen. And it looks kind of funny at first, but then you kind of get used to it, and you still get to enjoy the white spathe part of the flower, but without all the mess of the pollen.